Just one seat at a graduation ceremony showed me exactly where I stood in my own family. It all began with a phone call I was never supposed to hear, and it ended with a silence so heavy it seemed to shake the very walls. That morning my bedroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat blending with the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I stood in front of the mirror, slowly tying a navy silk tie. It was the kind of tie reserved for important occasions, and today was the most important day of Jasmine's life, her graduation from Howard University. For 17 years I had lived for this moment. I had imagined myself standing there, chest held high, watching the daughter I had raised with everything I had step onto that stage to receive her honor. But the face in the mirror did not reflect excitement. It reflected a man performing the final rituals of a contract that had been torn apart long ago without him ever realizing it. I walked downstairs. Diane was standing in the living room looking radiant and sharp as always, but when our eyes met I didn't see the warmth of a wife. I saw calculation. She told me that because the front row had limited seating, I should sit in the overflow section in the back to make room for Marcus. Marcus, the biological father, who had only ever appeared in birthday photos and empty promises, was now being given the seat I had spent 17 years earning with sweat and sacrifice. They thought I was nothing more than a walking ATM that didn't feel pain. They thought that if I stayed silent it meant I agreed. But they were wrong. When I stepped outside and got into my car, I knew one thing for certain: this house would no longer be the place I returned to tonight. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, sit back, and listen to the whole story with me. And if this story gives you something to think about, don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe. Betrayal doesn't always come as a slap across the face. Sometimes it arrives when people quietly ask you to step aside, so someone else, someone who has never touched the mud or done the work, can stand in the spotlight. But before I tell you about the 3 phone calls that changed the lives of 4 people forever, we need to go back 17 years. Because to build a home for them, I slowly wore myself down piece by piece. 17 years. That's long enough for a sapling to grow into an ancient tree, and long enough for a man to forget what his own face looked like before it carried the lines of constant worry. It all started on a rainy afternoon. Jasmine was only 7 then. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had stopped by for a visit and would soon leave, just like Marcus, her biological father, always did. Marcus was the kind of man whose promises sparkled but vanished like morning mist. He would appear out of nowhere with a giant teddy bear. Jasmine would laugh and hug it for 10 minutes. Then he would disappear again for 6 months. He left Diane with overdue bills. He left behind the constant fear of being evicted from the apartment we were renting. I made a promise to myself that day. Jasmine would never have to see her mother's anxious tears again. I wasn't her biological father, but I chose to be a real one. My love wasn't in words. It was in the dry, unforgiving numbers of my bank statements. Let me tell you about what sweat looks like when it's buried beneath the foundation of a home. When Jasmine was 8, she needed braces. Diane looked at the estimate and fell silent. That night I quietly took on a night shift at a warehouse. For 6 straight months. No full night of sleep. 2 in the morning. Cold fluorescent lights. The smell of grease and dust. I counted crates and inventory just to pay for the metal braces that would straighten her smile. When Jasmine was 12, she wanted to learn dance. Satin shoes. Sparkling dresses. Tuition at a prestigious academy. I sold my motorcycle. It had been my only treasure from my younger days. I stood in the dark corner of the auditorium watching her spin across the stage. Marcus was there that night too. He showed up with a bouquet of bright red roses, took a photo with her, posted it on social media. My daughter, my pride. The audience saw the smiles. No one saw the tuition bill folded inside my jacket pocket. I was there for every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, every night she woke up burning with fever. I taught her how to drive. I carefully checked every part of the car to make sure she would be completely safe. My bank account usually sent me alerts at 2 in the morning. Jasmine's card had been declined while she was out with friends. She never complained, and I never said a word. I simply transferred the money, quietly, because I never wanted her to feel embarrassed. 17 years. I filled every gap Marcus left behind with my patience and my money. I bought this house with inheritance money and the savings of a lifetime. I let Diane put her name on the lease so she could feel confident and secure. But I was the one writing the check every single month. I had mistaken dependence for love. They grew used to me always being there like air. No one ever thanks the air until the moment they start to suffocate. Everything went on like that, until Jasmine was accepted into Howard University. That was the peak of my pride, and the beginning of the collapse. The tuition was a staggering number. Marcus promised again that he would cover half of it, and again he disappeared, blaming some failed investment. I was the one who withdrew money from my retirement savings. I told myself, just the final stretch, Lucas. After she graduates, everything will be fine. What I didn't realize was that I was using the last bricks of my own life to build a stage for someone else. Look closely at the small details. The $20 bill I secretly slipped into Jasmine's coat pocket. The nights I repaired the plumbing myself. The weekends I painted the fence so I could save more money for her education fund. I had become a devoted caretaker in my own home. Marcus would occasionally stop by in a shiny, borrowed car talking about imaginary million-dollar projects. Diane looked at him with admiration. And me? I was just the dull, ordinary reality. They were intoxicated by Marcus's promises because they sounded beautiful. They spent my sacrifices because they were free. 17 years building the foundation, and I realized I had built it on sand. All it took was a single tide called graduation day, and the entire foundation was washed away, revealing the naked truth. In their eyes, I had never truly been family. I was just a financial project that had completed its purpose. If you've ever felt taken for granted after giving everything, you had hit the like button. Your support helps stories like this be heard. Graduation day. Howard's campus was shaded by tall trees. The sound of the ceremonial march filled the air. I stood there with a bouquet of the reddest roses I could find. The petals were soft and perfect, but the stems were full of thorns. I gripped them tightly. One thorn drove deep into my palm. It hurt, but that pain was nothing compared to what was about to happen. Diane walked toward me. She was wearing the new silk dress I had paid for just last week. Her face looked radiant, but her eyes avoided mine. Lucas, she said, lowering her voice, though it remained firm. There's only one seat left in the front row next to me. I saved it for Marcus. You know, after all, he's Jasmine's biological father. Today, she needs the completeness of a family. Family, I repeated. The word sounded strangely unfamiliar. Could you sit in the overflow seats in the back? She continued. It's more open there. Jasmine will still see you when she looks out over the audience. She said it as if she were doing me a favor. A seat in the 15th row. A place where the only thing I could see would be the tops of black graduation caps. Then Marcus arrived. He wore a shiny leather jacket and walked with the swagger of a man who had stayed up all night working to pay tuition. Diane smiled and slipped her arm around his waist. They stood together under the brightest sunlight. Jasmine came running. She didn't see me. She only saw Marcus. She threw her arms around him and laughed. "Dad, you made it," she shouted. They took a selfie. The three of them. A closed circle. A perfect family. I stood 5 steps away, half my face hidden in the shadow of the colonnade. In that frame there was no place for the man who had paid for the gown she was wearing. No place for the man who fixed the plumbing and worked night shifts in warehouses. I looked down at my hand. Blood from the thorn had begun to seep out, staining the paper wrapping of the flowers. I wasn't angry. Anger was too expensive an emotion. What I felt instead was something far more frightening. A cold, razor-sharp clarity. 17 years. I had fooled myself into believing that love could be purchased with devotion. I was wrong. Love is a privilege, and my devotion had only been treated like a free service. I didn't walk down to the 15th row. I turned around and headed straight to the parking lot. The thunder of applause behind me was no longer meant for me. I got into my car and placed the bouquet of roses on the passenger seat. Under the summer heat, the petals were already beginning to wilt. I looked into the rearview mirror. I saw a tired man. But the eyes staring back at me were no longer searching for approval. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Diane: remember to take pictures when she receives her diploma. I didn't reply. I started the engine and drove away, not toward home, but toward the law office. I had contacted a week earlier, right after I accidentally overheard a phone call between Diane and Marcus about pushing the troublesome old man out of the ruckus. Picture once Jasmine graduated. They wanted a complete family without me. Fine, they would have it. But they would soon discover that the price of that completeness was far higher than they could afford. The climax of this story had only just begun. If you're curious about how Lucas reclaimed what was rightfully his, don't look away. You'll find out soon enough. That night the house was silent. I sat in my study without turning on the lights. The only illumination came from the streetlights outside, slipping through the narrow gap in the window. I watched those thin beams of light crawl slowly across the wooden desk, much like my life had passed by quietly and unnoticed. Diane and Jasmine still hadn't returned. They were probably celebrating in some expensive restaurant, with Marcus, paying with the secondary credit card that I would settle at the end of the month. I opened a drawer and pulled out a zinc-colored file folder. There were no memories inside it, only cold truths printed on A4 paper. I picked up the phone. Call number 1. Hello, this is Lucas. I'd like to confirm the termination of the lease for Jasmine Collins's apartment in Georgetown. Yes, effective on the 31st of this month. No renewal. Please transfer the security deposit to my personal account. Thank you. One task completed. The dream apartment Jasmine had just been bragging about to her friends would disappear in 2 weeks. She thought it was a graduation gift. In reality, it was a privilege, and I had just revoked it. The second call. Priority Banking Customer Service. How may I assist you? I'd like to freeze all secondary credit cards under the names Diane and Jasmine. Immediately. Yes, report them as lost or canceled, however you prefer. I don't want to see a single transaction after midnight tonight. My fingers didn't tremble. There was a strange sense of relief when the long tones signaled the end of the call, like cutting off a bloodline that had been abused for far too long. The third call. This one was for the real estate agent. Hi, Bill. The house in Annapolis. I've signed all the electronic documents. Put it on the market first thing tomorrow morning. I'm fine with listing at 5% below market value. I need quick liquidity. And Bill, don't contact Diane's phone. Only deal directly with me. I ended the call. 7 hours earlier, I had still been a devoted husband and father. Now, I was simply a man exercising ownership. Many people would call me cruel. They'd say, why not just sit down and talk it out? But they wouldn't understand. For 17 years I had spoken through my actions, and their answer had always been betrayal. You cannot repair someone with words when they only see you as a tool. I stood up and walked into the living room. My eyes moved slowly across the house. Every painting on the wall, every piece of furniture, all of it carried the mark of my sacrifices. Diane had always believed this was her home, because her name had once been on the old lease agreement. What she forgot was that I had quietly purchased the ownership rights to the building through an asset management company last year. She had been sleeping comfortably inside an illusion of security that I myself had woven. Then I heard the sound of keys in the lock. Jasmine's laughter. Diane's voice complaining that Marcus had forgotten his wallet again when it was time to pay for dinner. They stepped inside. When Jasmine saw me sitting in the dark, she jumped slightly. Dad, why are you sitting here, and why did you leave early this afternoon? You embarrassed me in front of my friends. I looked at my daughter. Her graduation gown was still draped over her arm. Her eyes were filled with irritation, not the slightest hint of concern about why I had left. Did you hear what I said? She snapped. I stood up and slowly walked toward the staircase. I heard you, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Congratulations on graduating, Jasmine. I hope you captured the best moments today, because starting tomorrow, reality will begin knocking on the door. Diane frowned. What the hell are you talking about, Lucas? Are you being philosophical again? I didn't turn around. No, I said quietly. I'm simply conducting a final audit. Good night, Diane. That night I slept very well. For the first time in 17 years, I wasn't worrying about how much money I would have to earn tomorrow just to keep them satisfied. I only had to worry about myself. Lucas's silence was the harshest punishment of all. How do you think Diane would react when her credit card was declined the next morning? Leave your prediction in the comments below. Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. I sat at the head of the dining table sipping a cup of black coffee without sugar. Its bitterness kept me sharp and alert. Diane stormed downstairs holding her phone, her face flushed with anger. Jasmine followed behind, her eyes swollen probably from just reading the email from her apartment manager. Lucas. What the hell is going on? Diane threw the credit card onto the table. The metallic slap against the wood echoed through the room. Why was my card declined at Starbucks? And Jasmine says she can't log into the rent payment portal anymore. I set my coffee cup down. Slowly, I canceled them. The room fell into a suffocating silence. You did what Diane stammered. Are you out of your mind? We have so many things to pay for. Jasmine needs to prepare for her internship. Marcus also said he would. Marcus, I interrupted, a faint smile touching my lips. Then call Marcus. Tell him to give you his credit card. Or ask him to start paying rent for his daughter. You can't do this, Dad, Jasmine screamed, tears streaming down her face. You promised you'd take care of me until I had a stable job. Are you just going to throw me out onto the street? I looked straight into her eyes. The same daughter I had once stayed up all night caring for when she was sick. I'm not throwing you away, Jasmine, I said calmly. I'm simply returning you to the position you chose. The front row right next to your real father. I'm sure a wonderful father like Marcus will find a way to make sure you're not homeless at the end of this month. You're taking revenge, aren't you? Diane shouted. All because of one seat at a graduation ceremony. You're a petty man, Lucas. For 17 years you played the hero. Now you're showing your true face. You're just a controlling monster. I stood up and opened the zinc-colored file folder I had prepared earlier. I pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward her. This is the financial statement for the past 17 years. Tuition, orthodontics, insurance, car payments, and even the vacations that Marcus took credit for, but that I actually paid for. The total comes to $1,240,000. I pulled out another document. And this is the certificate of ownership for this building. I don't rent this house, Diane. I bought it through an investment fund last year. The lease agreement with your name on it expired long ago, with a management company that I happen to be the sole owner of. Diane's face drained from red to pale. She picked up the document, her hands trembling. That's impossible. You told me you were just an office employee. That's what you wanted to believe, I replied, my voice cold as ice. You preferred to think I was an ordinary obedient man, a money-printing machine that never asked for anything. Because if you admitted what I was capable of, you'd have to admit you owed me far too much, and you never wanted to feel indebted. Dad, please. Jasmine collapsed into a chair, her voice desperate. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll make Marcus apologize to you. Just don't throw me out of that apartment. I looked at her. For a moment my chest tightened. But then the image of the three of them taking that selfie flashed back into my mind. The thorn piercing my hand. Jasmine, you weren't wrong, I said quietly. You were simply living according to what your mother and I taught you, that my sacrifices were something to be taken for granted. But the final lesson I can give you in the real world is this: nothing in this world is free, especially kindness. I turned to Diane, who was staring at me like I was a stranger. You have 2 weeks to pack your things. This house has already been sold. The new owner will take possession on the 15th of next month. Marcus has that luxury apartment downtown, doesn't he? I'm sure he'll be happy to take you both in. You can't sell the house while I'm still living here. Diane screamed in desperation. I can, I said, gathering the documents back into the folder. And I did. My lawyer will send you the official notice this afternoon. From now on, all communication will go through him. I picked up my car keys and walked toward the door. Lucas, Diane called after me, her voice breaking. Where are you going? I paused at the doorway and looked out at the yard where I had repainted the fence myself just last summer. I'm heading toward my freedom, I said. A place where no one asks me to sit in the 15th row of my own life. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked shut, a sound that marked the end of a chapter filled with deception. In the morning sunlight, I saw Marcus parked at the end of the street. He was probably there to pick them up for breakfast, just like he had promised. As I drove past him, I rolled down the window and nodded in greeting. He looked at me confused. Just wait, Marcus. The bill for your complete family is already on its way. A brutal truth had been exposed. When the money disappeared, would their perfect family still exist? Hit like, if you believe Lucas did the right thing. 6 months later, the coastal town of Annapolis welcomed me with the salty smell of the sea and the cries of seagulls overhead. I sat in the small woodworking shed behind my new house, a place barely large enough for one person but filled with sunlight. The steady sound of a saw cutting through wood, The smooth scrape of a plane gliding across the surface. I was building birdhouses. It was a hobby I had abandoned for 17 years, while I chased numbers and night shifts. Here, no one asked anything of me. No one looked at my wallet before looking into my eyes. The phone on the table vibrated. A message from Jasmine. Dad, I just received my first paycheck from my sales job. I've sent you $500. I know it's nothing compared to what you spent on me, but I want to start somewhere. Marcus left 3 months ago when he realized Mom didn't have any assets in her name anymore. She's working at a department store now. We miss you. I looked at the number $500 on the screen. It didn't make me richer. But for the first time in her life, Jasmine understood the value of work and sacrifice. The greatest punishment I gave them wasn't taking the house away or cutting off the money. The greatest punishment was letting them face reality without my protection. When Marcus, the hero in those selfie photos, realized that being a father meant financial responsibility and sacrifice, he ran away even faster than the way he had first appeared. Diane learned that borrowed glory fades the moment the person supplying the power pulls the plug. And Jasmine finally understood that the front row seat in life is not something someone gives you, it's something you must earn for yourself. I set the wood plane down and stepped out onto the porch looking toward the horizon. Many people have asked me, do you regret those 17 years? The answer is no. I don't regret loving. I don't regret being devoted. What I regret is allowing my kindness to become a kind of unconditional service, one that made the people receiving it forget that the one giving it also had a soul and wounds of his own. My story is not about hatred. It is about awakening. In life, there is a very thin line between sacrifice and servitude. When you sacrifice for someone who appreciates it, that is love. But when you sacrifice for someone who believes it's simply their right, that is self-abuse. Never allow your kindness to become a one-sided contract where you give everything and receive only forgetfulness in return. Since then, I've always kept 3 lessons in mind. First, be clear about your own worth. Don't wait for someone else to place you in the front row of life. If they refuse to give you the seat you deserve, build your own stage. Second, real love can never exist without respect. If someone only loves you when your wallet is full, or when you're solving their problems, that isn't family. It's a toxic, symbiotic relationship. Third, never be afraid to start over. At 63, I lost my old house, and the family I once believed was perfect. But I found myself again. And the quiet life in Annapolis is worth far more than any false words of gratitude. Sometimes the journey to reclaim justice for yourself begins with a firm silence. You don't have to shout for people to see that you're hurting. You simply have to stand up and walk away when the graduation ceremony of exploitation begins. Join our community by hitting like and subscribe for more real, raw, family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this space. This is Dad's real-life revenge, where the truth always finds its rightful place.